Red and blue lights cut through the pouring rain, reflecting off the polished hood of a luxury sedan. A rookie cop unholsters his weapon, convinced he's cornered a brazen car thief in a millionaire's enclave. He demands the driver step out, completely unaware that the man he is about to violently handcuff is the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. The rain was coming down in absolute sheets over the affluent suburb of Crestwood Hills, Illinois. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sprawling estates, hidden behind wrought iron gates and ancient oak trees, were dark, their wealthy occupants long asleep. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of heavy tires slicing through the puddles on the freshly paved asphalt. Behind the wheel of a flawless, obsidian-black 2026 Mercedes-Benz S-Class sat Arthur Pendleton. At 64 years old, Arthur was a man who carried the weight of the world with an effortless, quiet dignity. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, the tie already loosened around his collar after a grueling 3-hour charity gala in downtown Chicago. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his posture, even when exhausted, was perfectly rigid. Arthur wasn't just a successful man, he was the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. He had spent 35 years navigating the brutal, sharp-elbowed world of the criminal justice system, first as a public defender, then as a highly feared prosecutor, and finally as a universally respected judge. But tonight, in the blinding rain, Arthur was just a black man driving a $200,000 car in a neighborhood where the police rarely expected to see him. 2 miles behind Arthur, idling in the parking lot of a closed country club, sat a Crestwood Hills police cruiser. Inside were Officer Travis Decker and his training officer, Corporal Brian Hayes. Decker was 24, a former high school linebacker with a military buzz cut and an aggressive chip on his shoulder. He had been on the suburban force for less than a year and was desperately itching for real action. Crestwood Hills was notoriously quiet, mostly noise complaints and teenagers throwing parties. Decker wanted a felony bust. He wanted a story for the locker room. As Arthur's Mercedes glided past the country club, Decker sat up straight, his eyes locking onto the sleek taillights. "Look at that," Decker muttered, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. S-Class, midnight tint, going 32 in a 35, suspiciously slow. Corporal Hayes, a 20-year veteran who was 2 months away from his pension, barely looked up from the glowing screen of his mobile data terminal. "It's raining sideways, Travis. Everyone is driving slow. Let it go." "No, I'm running the plate," Decker insisted, aggressively typing the Mercedes custom license plate into the system. Here is where the first domino fell in a chain reaction of catastrophic assumptions. Arthur had literally purchased the vehicle 48 hours prior. He had transferred the vanity plates from his old BMW to the new Mercedes, but the Department of Motor Vehicles' statewide database had a known 72-hour lag for luxury vehicle registrations to officially populate across all municipal servers. The computer on Decker's dashboard pinged. A bright yellow banner flashed across the screen. "No record found / pending match." Decker's pulse spiked. "Plates don't match the vehicle in the system. It's a phantom tag, Hayes. That's a stolen car." "Travis, the system is updating," Hayes sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Look at the neighborhood. It's probably just some hedge fund guy who bought it yesterday. Or it's a smash-and-grab crew from the city taking a joyride," Decker snapped, shifting the cruiser into drive. "I'm initiating a stop. This is exactly how they move these high-end imports out of state." Before Hayes could talk him down, Decker hit the sirens. Inside the Mercedes, Arthur sighed. The sudden burst of red and blue lights illuminated the leather interior of his car. He glanced in the rearview mirror, genuinely perplexed. He was well under the speed limit. His turn signals were functional, and his registration, at least the physical paperwork, was sitting neatly in his glove box. Arthur calmly engaged his right blinker and smoothly pulled the heavy vehicle onto the shoulder of the tree-lined road, shifting it into park. He turned off the engine, turned on the interior dome light, and rolled down his window. It was a routine he had taught his own sons decades ago. Hands visible on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. No sudden movements. Wait for instructions. Arthur wasn't angry. He was just exhausted. He fully expected to hand over his credentials, receive a polite apology, and be on his way. He had no idea that Officer Travis Decker was approaching the vehicle with his hand resting dangerously on the grip of his unholstered Glock. "Keep your hands exactly where I can see them," Decker barked, his voice cracking slightly with adrenaline as he stopped just behind the driver's side door, shining a 2,000-lumen tactical flashlight directly into Arthur's eyes. Arthur blinked against the blinding glare. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "I said keep your hands on the wheel," Decker shouted over the pouring rain. "Do not move." Arthur's deep, resonant voice remained perfectly level. "My hands are on the wheel, officer. I am not moving. I am simply asking why I have been pulled over." Decker edged closer, peering through the rain-streaked window. He saw Arthur, a black man in a high-end suit. In Decker's biased, adrenaline-fueled logic, the suit was a prop. The car was stolen. The calm demeanor was a front. "The plates on this vehicle don't exist in the system," Decker ordered aggressively. "Whose car is this?" "It is my car," Arthur replied, speaking slowly and clearly, the way one might speak to a volatile child. "I purchased it 2 days ago from the dealership in Oak Brook. The registration paperwork is in the glove compartment. If you permit me, I will retrieve it for you." "You aren't reaching for anything," Decker snapped, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, now." From the passenger side, Corporal Hayes approached, shining his own flashlight. "Travis, take it easy," Hayes murmured. "Let the man get his paperwork." But Decker's authority had been questioned, and his ego was now in the driver's seat. "I gave you a lawful order," Decker yelled at Arthur. "Step out of the car, keep your hands where I can see them, and turn around." Arthur Pendleton froze. In 35 years of practicing law, he had read thousands of police reports that started exactly like this. He knew the statistics. He knew how quickly a traffic stop in the dark could turn fatal. For a brief, fleeting second, Arthur considered loudly declaring his title. "I am the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court," but as he looked at the aggressive, trembling young officer shining a light in his face, a different instinct took over. The instinct of a man who wanted to see exactly how the citizens of his state were treated when they didn't have a badge or a gavel to protect them. "Very well," Arthur said softly. He slowly opened the door and stepped out into the freezing, torrential rain. The rain instantly soaked through Arthur's $3,000 suit, chilling him to the bone. He stood tall, towering over Officer Decker by a good 3 inches, his posture impeccably straight despite the downpour. "Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the car," Decker commanded, stepping forward and aggressively grabbing Arthur's left arm. Arthur's jaw tightened at the physical contact. The sheer indignity of it burned, but his discipline held. He turned smoothly, placing his hands flat against the wet, cold roof of his own vehicle. "Officer," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the authoritative timbre that routinely silenced crowded courtrooms. "I strongly advise you to check the temporary registration taped to the bottom right corner of the rear windshield before you escalate this any further." "I don't need advice from a car thief," Decker sneered, kicking Arthur's legs apart to widen his stance. The young officer roughly patted Arthur down, his hands clumsily searching the tailored pockets of the suit. He pulled out Arthur's leather wallet and tossed it onto the hood of the police cruiser behind them, without looking at it. "Travis," Corporal Hayes warned again, stepping out of the rain and closer to the action. Hayes had walked around to the back of the Mercedes. He wiped the rain off the rear windshield and squinted. "Hey, there is a temporary dealer tag taped inside here. It's hard to see through the tint." Decker ignored him. He was locked into his narrative. "Fake tags are standard for chop shop crews," Decker said confidently. He unclipped his steel handcuffs from his belt. "Put your hands behind your back." Arthur turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Decker. The judge's expression was no longer just tired. It was profoundly dangerous. It was the look of a man meticulously cataloguing every civil rights violation occurring in real time. "You are making a monumental error in judgment," Arthur stated clearly. "You lack probable cause for an arrest. I have not exhibited any behavior indicating a flight risk or a threat. If you place those cuffs on me, you are crossing a legal threshold from which you cannot return." Decker scoffed, entirely missing the highly academic, deeply precise legal terminology Arthur was using. To Decker, it was just a criminal trying to talk his way out of a felony. "Save the lawyer talk for the judge," Decker mocked, violently wrenching Arthur's arms behind his back. The cold steel ratcheted tightly around Arthur's wrists, biting into his skin. The metallic click-click-click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed sharply over the sound of the rain. Corporal Hayes walked over, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Decker, I really think we should check his ID first. Look at the guy. He's not fighting us. He's going in for grand theft auto, Hayes." "We'll ID him at the precinct," Decker said, shoving Arthur toward the back of the police cruiser. "Watch your head." Decker didn't bother to shield Arthur's head as he forced him into the hard plastic back seat of the squad car. Arthur slid awkwardly onto the slick bench, his arms painfully pinned beneath his own weight. The doors slammed shut, sealing Arthur in the claustrophobic, heavily sanitized scent of the cruiser. Through the wire mesh dividing the front and back seats, Arthur watched as Decker and Hayes argued silently in the rain. Hayes was pointing at the wallet on the hood of the cruiser. Decker aggressively waved him off, grabbing the wallet and shoving it into his utility pocket without opening it. Decker was entirely focused on the prize, the stolen Mercedes. He called for a tow truck to impound the $200,000 vehicle. Arthur sat in the darkness, water dripping from his silver hair into his eyes. His wrists throbbed. He took a slow, deep breath, centering himself. The anger was there, a hot, roaring fire in his chest, but he suppressed it beneath decades of judicial temperament. He wasn't going to fight this on the side of the road. He was going to fight this in the light of day. He was going to let Officer Travis Decker dig his grave, as deep as he possibly could. When Decker and Hayes finally got into the front seat, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. "Tow truck is 15 minutes out," Decker announced proudly, putting the cruiser in gear. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Arthur. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Decker rattled off the Miranda warning with the bored, practiced rhythm of a TV cop. Arthur didn't say a single word. "Nothing to say now?" Decker taunted as they drove toward the precinct. "You were pretty chatty out there in the rain. What, did you think dressing up in a nice suit was going to fool us? People from your side of the city don't belong in Crestwood Hills at midnight unless they're up to no good." Corporal Hayes flinched in the passenger seat. "Travis, shut up," Hayes hissed under his breath. "Just drive." "What? I'm just telling the truth," Decker defended himself. Arthur memorized the exact phrasing of Decker's words. "People from your side of the city." The implicit bias was so thick, it was suffocating. Arthur lived in a $5 million estate, less than a mile from where he was pulled over. He paid the property taxes that funded Decker's salary. The drive took 10 minutes. They pulled into the Sally Port of the Crestwood Hills 4th Precinct, a brightly lit modern facility. The garage doors rolled down behind them with a heavy metallic thud, trapping them inside. Decker hauled Arthur out of the back seat. Arthur's suit was ruined, plastered to his body, his wrists bruised and swelling. "Walk," Decker ordered, grabbing Arthur by the bicep and steering him through the heavy steel doors into the booking area. The precinct was quiet for a Tuesday night. A few officers milled about, drinking stale coffee. Behind the raised wooden booking desk sat Desk Sergeant Riley, a heavy-set man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What do we have, Decker?" Riley asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Grand Theft Auto," Decker announced, his voice practically booming with pride. "Caught him red-handed driving a stolen 26 Maybach down Willow Creek Road. Phantom plates, textbook chop shop runner." Riley finally looked up. His eyes landed on the tall, drenched, distinguished black man standing in handcuffs. Riley's brow furrowed. He squinted. There was something intensely familiar about the man's face. He had seen it on the news. He had seen it framed on the wall of the mayor's office. "Decker," Riley said slowly, a pit of dread suddenly forming in his stomach. "Did you ID this suspect?" "He refused to hand it over in the car," Decker lied smoothly. "I have his wallet right here. Haven't opened it yet." Decker pulled the soaked leather wallet from his pocket and tossed it onto the raised desk. "Open it," Arthur spoke for the first time since he had been placed in handcuffs. His voice was deathly quiet, but it commanded the immediate attention of every single person in the room. The casual chatter of the other officers instantly died. Sergeant Riley reached for the wallet with trembling hands. He flipped it open. Sitting behind a clear plastic window was a solid gold, star-shaped badge. Next to it was a laminated state identification card. Riley read the name. Then he read the title. The blood completely drained from the sergeant's face, leaving him looking like a ghost under the harsh fluorescent lights. Riley slowly looked up from the wallet, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. He looked at Decker, who was standing there with a smug grin, and then he looked at the man in the handcuffs. "Decker," Riley whispered, his voice shaking. "Do you know who this is?" "Decker," Sergeant Riley whispered, his voice shaking so violently he could barely form the syllables. "Do you know who this is?" Officer Travis Decker rolled his eyes, utterly oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath his career. "It's a stolen ID, Sarge. Probably pulled it out of a judge's house during a burglary. Just process him." "It is not a stolen ID, you absolute fool," Riley hissed, standing up from his desk. He held the gold badge up as if it were a live grenade. "This is Arthur Pendleton. He is the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. He lives in the gated community on the north end of Willow Creek." The words hung in the sterile, fluorescent-lit booking room like a death sentence. The two other officers milling by the coffee machine stopped dead in their tracks. A heavy, suffocating silence descended over the precinct. Corporal Brian Hayes, who had just walked through the Sallyport doors, heard Riley's pronouncement. The colour drained from Hayes's face. He staggered backward slightly, his back hitting the concrete wall. 20 years of service, 2 months from a pension, all of it flashing before his eyes because he couldn't control a hot-headed rookie. Decker's smug grin finally faltered. He looked at the drenched man standing before him, his arms awkwardly pinned behind his back. "No," Decker stammered, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. "No, that's impossible. The car was unregistered. He's from—" "Officer Decker," Arthur interrupted. His voice was no longer the quiet, patient tone of a civilian trying to explain himself. It was the booming, resonant voice of a man who commanded the highest courtroom in the state. "I strongly suggest you stop speaking. Every word you utter is compounding your civil liability." Riley practically lunged over the desk. "Get the cuffs off him. Decker, take those damn cuffs off him right now." Decker's hands trembled as he reached for his keys, taking a hesitant step toward Arthur. "Stop!" Arthur commanded. The single word cracked like a whip. Decker froze. Arthur slowly turned his head to look at Sergeant Riley. "Sergeant, Officer Decker has demonstrated a profound inability to follow protocol, assess a situation, or respect basic constitutional rights. I do not want him touching me again. You will remove these cuffs, and then you will call Captain Miller. I do not care if he is asleep. Wake him." Riley scrambled around the wooden desk, his keys jingling frantically. "Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor. I am so deeply sorry for this." Riley's hands shook as he inserted the small key into the steel cuffs. With a double click, the metal jaws snapped open. Arthur slowly brought his arms forward. He rubbed his raw, bruised wrists, his eyes never leaving Decker. The young officer was pale, his chest heaving as the adrenaline of the arrest was rapidly replaced by the sheer terror of consequence. "Corporal Hayes," Arthur said, turning his gaze to the veteran officer trembling by the door. "Yes, sir, Your Honor," Hayes stammered, standing at rigid attention. "I advised you to check the temporary registration taped to the rear window. Did you see it?" Hayes swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, Your Honor, I saw it. I told Officer Decker it was there. And yet, you stood by and allowed a junior officer to illegally detain, assault, and kidnap a citizen under the color of law," Arthur stated, his tone mercilessly precise. "Your proximity to retirement does not absolve you of your duty to intervene, Corporal." For the next 20 minutes, Arthur sat on a hard wooden bench in the booking area. He refused a towel. He refused a cup of coffee. He sat in his ruined Brioni suit, dripping water onto the linoleum floor, a living monument to the department's catastrophic failure. No one spoke. The officers in the room barely breathed. At 12:45 a.m., the front doors of the precinct flew open. Captain David Miller sprinted into the room, wearing a hastily buttoned uniform shirt over sweatpants. He took one look at the Chief Justice sitting on the booking bench and looked as though he might physically be sick. "Chief Justice Pendleton," Captain Miller gasped, rushing forward. "My God, sir, I cannot apologize enough. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. We are voiding the arrest immediately. Your car is being brought back from the impound lot right now. Please, come into my office. Let us handle this privately." Arthur stood up. He towered over the breathless captain. "There will be no private conversations, Captain Miller," Arthur said loudly, ensuring every officer in the room could hear him. "What happened tonight was not a misunderstanding. It was a targeted, aggressive deprivation of my civil rights based entirely on racial profiling and a fragile ego." Arthur pointed a long, steady finger at Decker, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Your officer initiated a stop without probable cause. He ignored exculpatory evidence. He fabricated a narrative. He illegally searched my person. He placed me in handcuffs. He falsified his initial verbal report to the desk sergeant, claiming I refused to identify myself. All of this was captured on his body-worn camera and the dashboard camera of his cruiser." Arthur stepped closer to Captain Miller, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I am issuing a formal, verbal preservation order right now. If a single second of that footage is deleted, corrupted, or mysteriously lost, I will personally see to it that the State Bureau of Investigation charges you, Captain, with spoliation of evidence and obstruction of justice. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Honor, crystal clear," Miller choked out. "Good," Arthur said, adjusting his wet jacket. "Now release me. We have a great deal of work to do in the morning." The fallout was completely unprecedented. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Arthur Pendleton had not filed a lawsuit. Instead, he filed a devastatingly detailed formal complaint with the State Attorney General and the Department of Justice, triggering an immediate federal civil rights investigation into the Crestwood Hills Police Department. The media caught wind of the story by noon. The optics were utterly damning, An elite, white suburban police force had brutalized the highest-ranking black judicial official in the state for driving a nice car in his own neighborhood. The dashcam footage, which Captain Miller hastily handed over to the Attorney General, was leaked to the press. The public watched in horror as Officer Decker sneered, "People from your side of the city don't belong in Crestwood Hills at midnight." It was a masterclass in implicit bias, caught on high-definition video. The twist of the knife, however, came 2 days later during a televised press conference. Arthur Pendleton stood at a podium, wearing a pristine navy suit, looking every bit the formidable jurist he was. Officer Decker made a series of assumptions on Tuesday night. Arthur addressed the sea of reporters. He assumed I was a criminal. He assumed I was uneducated. He assumed I lacked the resources to defend myself. But his most fatal assumption was his misunderstanding of the law. Arthur leaned into the microphone. During my illegal arrest, Officer Decker claimed he had the right to search my vehicle based on the suspicion of a phantom plate. Ironically, 9 years ago, the state Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling strictly prohibiting warrantless vehicle searches based solely on delayed DMV database updates. It is the defining case law taught in every police academy in this state. Arthur paused, letting the silence build in the press room. "I know this," Arthur said, a rare, sharp smile touching the corners of his mouth, "because I am the judge who authored that exact opinion." The room erupted. Decker hadn't just arrested the Chief Justice. He had violated the very legal precedent the man had written. The hammer fell swiftly. Travis Decker was stripped of his badge and fired within 72 hours. The state's attorney charged him with official misconduct, false arrest, and aggravated battery. The felony bust Decker had been so desperate for ended up being his own. Corporal Brian Hayes was forced into early retirement, losing a significant percentage of his pension for his failure to intervene. But Arthur Pendleton didn't stop at punishing the individuals. He leveraged the absolute media firestorm to enact sweeping systemic change. Instead of suing the city for millions of dollars, a settlement that would have been paid by the taxpayers, Arthur negotiated a legally binding consent decree. Crestwood Hills was forced to overhaul its entire training program, implement strict anti-bias protocols, and establish an independent civilian oversight board. Arthur returned to his bench the following Monday. He didn't speak of the incident in his courtroom. He didn't need to. Every prosecutor, defense attorney, and police officer who stood before him knew exactly what he was capable of. They knew he possessed an unwavering dedication to the law and a complete lack of tolerance for those who abused it. Arthur Pendleton had taken the worst of the justice system, dragged it into the light, and used it to forge a sharper, fairer sword. And he did it without ever raising his voice. If this story made your blood boil and your heart cheer for true justice, you are not alone. The abuse of power is real, but so is the power of those who stand up to it. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in